and welcome to the video. In this video, we're going to talk about the 6 strategic finance building blocks to your success. Here's the critical point to understand. Your job isn't to be a numbers geek in any one of the areas, but essentially to be the CEO across all 6 different areas of strategic finance. We're going to cover things such as compliance and risk management. We're going to talk about accrual accounting. We're going to talk about forecasting and budgeting. We're going to talk about cash flow management, scenario analysis, and then finally, valuation modeling. And as you can see, all of these different aspects, they relate to the area of numbers, but they come at it from very different perspectives. Let's start at the base of the pyramid. The first thing that you'll be learning about is compliance and risk management. As I like to say, the first rule of being a doctor is do no harm. Well, the first rule of being a CFO is don't lose money. So we'll talk about all of the ways that you need to stay compliant and protect yourself against risks in an e-commerce business. Then we'll build from there up to accrual accounting, which is your historical financial reporting, including your income statement, your balance sheet, and your cash flow statement. We'll build on that base and go into looking at the future and building a forecast on both the revenue and expense side of things. We'll then take a look at, once you have your forecast in place, how do you manage cash flow to make sure that you have enough capital to grow the company according to that forecast. We'll talk about having a range of outcomes from worst case to base case to best case, and then being able to make business changes based on those core drivers. And finally, we'll talk about valuation modeling, which is the sum total of the other 5 areas and relating all of your numbers into a valuation model that you can present to a buyer. Okay, starting off with compliance and risk management. It might be one of the least spent time on of the strategic finance areas because many people don't even see it as a part of strategic finance. But trust me, if you were a CFO in a public company, compliance and risk management is absolutely a core part of your function. There's many different types of compliance. I'm just going to list a few of them here so that you get an understanding about what this discipline of strategic finance is all about. There's Amazon compliance, which is essentially making sure that you're in compliance with terms of service, with their data rules, with email marketing, those types of things. There's also tax compliance, making sure that you're, for example, have sales tax in all of the states. Maybe you're doing something outside of an Amazon marketplace and you need to be collecting that sales tax. But it's also making sure that you're compliant with other types of taxes, such as VAT tax or income tax in a particular personal or corporate situation. There's compliance with laws. Are you set up correctly in your business? And then there's things like compliance with product safety laws, data privacy laws. So there's a whole bunch of legal compliance. And finally, the other area of compliance and risk management is the risk management itself, which really breaks down into 2 different areas. One of them is, how do I prevent a loss from happening in the first place? And then the second one is, in the event that there is a loss, how do I get the appropriate amount of insurance coverage to minimize any impact on my business? So that's the first discipline of strategic finance, called compliance and risk management. The next one is accrual accounting. The building blocks of accrual accounting starts with having what we refer to as a useful chart of accounts, meaning that your chart of accounts helps you categorize your revenue and expenses in order to get a solid view of your business. You need to be able to confirm whether or not you're on accrual-based revenue recognition or whether you're still using a cash-based system. And you'll have to look at that, whether or not you're getting your Amazon statements, if you're an Amazon business, directly and putting them into your accounting, or are you using a service such as A2X or ConnectBooks or another what's called accounting integration service. You're going to confirm with your team whether or not you're using a cost-based system for your expense recording, or are you recording things on a cash basis. And then you're going to make sure that you implement accrual basis for your paid media marketing expenses and for your general administrative expenses. And finally, you're going to look to make sure that you're setting up your add backs correctly so that the true definition of profit in the eyes of a buyer is being reflected. Once you've got that base in place, you can start to look at forecasting and budgeting. I can't overemphasize enough the importance of forecasting, because without forecasting, there's no cash flow planning, there's no corporate development, there's no resource planning for hiring people, and there's certainly no exit strategy planning of knowing when is the right time to exit. We always recommend that you start by forecasting your revenue first. Look at your current products, then look at new products, and then look at new sales channels, whether they be new marketplaces or actually new sales channels. And then after that, start to budget your expenses. Generally, we like to have you focus on your cost of goods sold and your paid media, because those are what are referred to as variable costs. And then after that, you take a look at your general and administrative overhead, or what we call your fixed costs. And then finally, each month, what you need to do is you need to look at the variance analysis of what you budgeted and what you actually achieved, and then continue to improve your forecasting. The next discipline of strategic finance is cash flow management. The goal is to always have secured enough cash to grow the company without constantly needing to manage weekly payables, or worse yet, not financing enough cash flow and running out of inventory. I like to start with asking the question of business owners, how much could you grow if you had unlimited access to cash? And interestingly enough, many people start out with, oh, I could double my business. But when you really get down to it, there are other bottlenecks that are in the system, maybe finding great new products, or maybe shipping and logistics and those types of things. But good cash flow management helps you remove the cash dynamic from the bottleneck of your growth so that you can focus on other ways to scale the company. It's very important that you understand that you have to stay ahead of what I call the circle of cash needs. And here's what I mean. You're going to want a buffer, because a lot of time we see people, you raise a bunch of cash, which is great. You then start to grow faster, which means that you need to place more inventory orders, which turns around and means that you need more cash. So cash flow is not a one-time event. It is a strategic process that is an ongoing process of procurement of the right capital, which may be debt and or even equity. And the key point is making sure that you have multiple options to get your capital. After cash flow management, you start to look at a more sophisticated version of a forecast called scenario analysis. Scenario analysis is where you're going to document the potential synergies that you might have in your business that, if all things go well, could create a better forecast. And then also contingencies on the negative side that might happen, that, hey, if I don't have this level of success in my products on my new launches, I know that I'm at least going to meet this base case. We recommend that you plan for 3 different scenarios. You start with your base case, and the goal of your base case is to be what I refer to as your most accurate forecast. What would you expect to happen, not given all things going right, but given your current understanding of the business? And we like to have that be an 80% confident or better. After you build your base case, which is what you think is going to happen, then you want to start to model different types of risks. Now, anybody can create a worst case budget that says, if I get shut down by Amazon, my revenue is 0. But that doesn't really help you manage the business. So you want to have a number that we call the take it to the bank number. And the reason why this is so critical with a buyer is because they literally are going to be taking it to the bank, and they're going to be lending money in order to finance your acquisition. So you want to make sure that you're developing a very conservative 90% or better use case. And then finally, take a look at your most optimistic case. It should still be attainable, so we don't like to go down to something that you might only have a 1/3 shot at hitting, but it should be maybe in that 70% range, and think about potential synergies. And you don't want to plan that everything is going to go right, but you want to plan on something that you want to motivate yourself, and if you have people on your team, you generally motivate them to try and achieve your target or your best case forecasts that you want in order for bonuses to be maximized for you and for your team members. And then finally, after we're done with scenario analysis, we get to risk mitigation and growth plans, and starting to look at what were the drivers in each one of those different scenarios. And what will happen, and this is why planning for selling a business is great for running it, you'll start to, in the in-depth analysis of all of these numbers, you'll start to understand and go, wow, I've really got a bottleneck in sourcing new products. So if I could get somebody that could help me with logistics and I don't have to spend as much time on logistics, I, as the CEO of my business, could work more in sourcing or in packaging or in brand design or whatever those bottlenecks are. Once you have your scenario analysis and the other building blocks in place, you've reached the top part of the pyramid and building a sophisticated valuation model for your business. Most people tend to think of a valuation model starting with the numbers. But when you're in the context of a transaction, I always like to start with there's 4 things that you're going to need to have in order to have an agreement with a buyer. And maybe the most important one is an aligned culture. And that doesn't mean that you're going to go work with them for 5 years, but it does mean that if you don't share a common value system with your buyer, the odds of you having a transaction struggle go way up. After you have the culture, you have to develop the initial model of what the investment is going to look like from a financial perspective on your side. What could I achieve in terms of the revenue and the future profitability? Then you take a look at the deal structure itself. Do I want to stick around for a couple of years after the sale, or do I want to more exit and then walk out the door within 90 days? Once I know what I'm structuring my own role to be and the deal overall, then I can start to talk about what is the right value or the right multiple. And then finally, after those 4 things are done, you get to the legal side of creating the right terms of the deal to make sure that you're legally protected. Valuation from a buy side perspective happens too, and it's slightly different than the sell side. If I'm a buyer, I'm trying to model what's the post-acquisition lift that I'm going to get. In other words, how fast can I grow this business? You may have only grown it as a seller at 20%, but if I can add more capital and more channels, maybe I have the chance to grow it at 50 or 60% year over year. The second thing a buyer is going to look at is they're going to look at how can they mitigate their risk or eliminate risks in the business. And then finally, they're going to look at the lift and they're going to look at the risks of the business, and they're going to start to calculate a return on investment, often calculated as what's called an internal rate of return, or an IRR, which is sometimes referred to as yield. They're going to look at that under multiple scenarios. They're going to take your information, they're going to add in their thought process, and eventually they're going to come up with the model that they see that's most appropriate. At the same time that they're doing that, you're going to be valuation modeling the deal on your side. What is your own cash at close that you're going to get if you close this transaction? What is your own version of the take it to the bank number? Because as I always like to say, any money that you don't collect at closing is money that is subject to a certain degree of risk. But if you only look at your cash at close, you're leaving money on the table. You really want to be looking at what's called your lifetime effective multiple, which is what is the amount that you're going to get over the lifetime of the deal divided by the earnings that you might have closing. And then finally, you're also going to be assessing culture is key, and you have to make sure the more money that you have out there, even if you only have a little bit out there, you're still going to have a sizable amount of money that comes after closing, and you're going to have trust and deal alignment with your particular buyer. So why did we go into such a deep dive on each one of these topics, and we're going to be spending even more time in each one of those particular disciplines? The reason is this. We want you to see the big picture of strategic finance. When I work with most e-commerce sellers, they're spending an inordinate amount of time on historical accounting, and they're spending that time at the detriment to the other things. So in other words, they're driving the car with way too much focus on the rearview mirror and not nearly enough focus on strategic finance going forward. Once you start to understand them and adopt the terminology to them, you're starting to adopt the language of a buyer. And as we see, that's one of the most important things to give confidence to a buyer is to let them know that you know how to speak their language. However, it is a complex topic and it's a long-term process of your involvement. So don't feel that you're going to learn all of these topics within the next week or two. It is going to be a process, and you want to go step by step and just feel like each month when you look at your numbers, you're building a better strategic finance core competency for the business. So your action items are to review each of these 6 building blocks and give an assessment of is it in place now today, And if not, to set forth a plan of how to implement each one of the building blocks. I know that if I had 100 people in a room and I asked them, and I went through all 6 of these, and I asked everybody to raise their hand if they felt comfortable that they had all 6 of these blocks implemented already in their business, as you can probably guess, there's only a few hands that would go up. Here's the important point. This is the opportunity for you to separate yourself from other business owners, because you'll now have the content provided to you to show you a clear path of how to build core competency across the 6 pillars of strategic finance. The last note that I'll make is that building this competency may take months or even years, but once you have it in place, I personally believe it's the most important aspect toward you having confidence in approaching a buyer and negotiating a premium valuation, because it'll be the first time that you can look a buyer directly in the eye and say, I know what I'm worth and why. So thanks for watching this video, and understand that mastering these building blocks will provide you with many key benefits in selling a business, but it will also provide a lot of key benefits in running it, including more accurately addressing what's going on in your business, taking the appropriate course corrections, and most importantly, protecting your business from risks that may be out there. Thank you.